How Splunk stores data. When Splunk processes raw data, it adds that data to indexes. Indexes are simply repositories for Splunk data. Splunk comes with a few indexes already built in, including one called main and one called _internal. As you can probably imagine, the _internal index is an index meant for storing Splunk internal logs. So incoming data comes in and Splunk transforms incoming data into what it calls events and stores those events in indexes. So we know what an index is now. It's simply a repository for Splunk data. And we need to know what an event is. An event is a single row of data. This single row of data has fields which are built in. They can be default fields. They can be fields that you specify using the field extractor. Fields are simply key value pairs. Username equals user123. That is a field. Splunk also adds default fields to all events. They are timestamp, host, source, and source type. The timestamp fields obviously adds a timestamp to each event. The host field is typically the host name or IP address of the source system. The source field is the name of the file, stream, or other input from which the event originates. And the source type is the format of the data. For example, if you look in that green box, that's an Apache log file, and it has a very specific format. And the source type for that is going to default to access_combined. That's just what the Apache log file source type is. Physically speaking, Splunk stores index data in buckets. In Splunk, an index contains compressed raw data and associated index files. These index files are spread out into different directories depending on their age. Splunk calls these directories buckets. There are 6 buckets, but only 5 of them are important for us to talk about. And they are hot, warm, cold, frozen, and thawed. The hot bucket contains newly indexed data. An index has 1 or more hot buckets. The warm bucket contains data rolled from the hot bucket with no active writing. An index has many warm buckets. The cold bucket contains data rolled from warm and moved into a different location. An index has many cold buckets. The thing to know about cold buckets is you specify a different physical location on the disk of where the cold bucket is stored. The frozen bucket is data that's rolled from cold. The indexer deletes frozen buckets by default, but you can choose to archive them first. And if you archive them and then have to retrieve the data, it goes into what's called a thawed bucket. And these are buckets restored from an archive. Here's where the buckets are in the file system. No matter if you're using Windows, Mac, or Linux, they're in the same location. And that is var lib splunk default db. And each bucket is a subdirectory. For example, in the hot path after the db/, we could have multiple hot buckets. Buckets have specific naming conventions, and we don't need to go into that here, but you can look at the Splunk docs for those naming conventions. Other things you can do with bucket. You can set a retirement and archiving policy. You can manually archive and restore from archives, remember the thawed bucket. You can back up your data. You can configure index sizes, and you can partition index data.